For thousands of years, the vast subcontinent of India has been known by its ancient, traditional name, Bharat. This name doesn't come from a conqueror who expanded the borders, but from the king whose name it bears, remembered for what he walked away from. King Bharata ruled a sprawling empire at a time when his authority was absolute. He sat at the center of a prosperous civilization, possessing the wealth and justice that defines a historical legacy. But he began to view his own success through a different lens. He saw that every palace eventually crumbles, and every political achievement is subject to time. He realized the material world offered nothing permanent for the soul. At the height of his power, Bharata divided his kingdom among his sons and left. He stepped down from his throne, stripped off his royal silk, and walked into the forest to seek a reality that wouldn't decay. He had abandoned a global empire with ease. However, his journey reveals that leaving a palace is different from freeing the mind. Physical renunciation was only the first step. While Bharata meditated by the river, a pregnant doe approached the water. A sudden lion's roar sent her into a panic. She made a desperate leap across the rushing river, but the shock was fatal. As she died, she gave birth to a small, orphaned fawn. Bharata's immediate response was an act of genuine kindness. He rescued the newborn, brought it to his hut, and took on the role of its protector. This rescue created a psychological anchor. The central node represents his focused consciousness. Concern for the fawn creates new orbital nodes that encircle and eclipse his focus. His meditation was replaced by constant anxiety, as the attachments snap into a rigid cage, binding his mind. When death finally came for Bharata, his final conscious thought was not of the divine. He died intensely focused on the welfare of the deer. The paradox of Bharata's fall is that it was triggered by a virtuous act. He had surrendered a kingdom, yet his mind remained tethered to the world through a single, small creature. Karma acts as a neutral accounting system. Since his consciousness was entirely occupied by the deer at death, the karmic wheel follows that momentum. His soul takes the shape of a deer, yet he retains full memory, a human mind trapped inside an animal body. He spent this entire life in silence, staying near the hermitages of sages and waiting for the lifespan of the deer to end. He was observing the world without participating. In this system, karma isn't a judgment handed down from above. It is simply the soul experiencing the physical consequences of the desires and attachments it cultivated. After the deer's body died, Bharata was born once more into a family of scholars. Carrying the lessons of 2 previous lives, he was determined to avoid forming any new connection to the world. He adopted a radical strategy. He pretended to be mute, dull, and entirely simple-minded. Known as Jada Bharata, he ensured society would find him useless, preventing any new bonds from forming. This strategy was tested when a group of tribal worshippers kidnapped him. They needed a human sacrifice for the goddess Kali, and a silent, unclaimed wanderer seemed like an easy choice. As the ceremonial blade is raised in the firelight, Bharata does not plead for his life or show fear. He has finally detached his identity from his physical shell. To him, the body is merely a temporary garment, and its destruction means nothing to his true self. Before the blow could fall, the goddess herself manifested from the altar. Enraged by the treatment of a realized soul, she struck down the captors and left Bharata standing in the middle of the carnage, completely untouched. Bharata walked away from the altar with the same silence he arrived with. He had achieved a state where neither life nor death could exert pressure on his mind. Bharata's final lesson took place on a dusty road when he was forced into labor by the guards of King Rahugana. The king was being carried in a heavy palanquin, and he needed an extra man to shoulder the wooden poles. Bharata disrupted the rhythm of the march. He was constantly jumping and stuttering his steps, trying to avoid stepping on the tiny insects and ants moving across the path. From inside the carriage, King Rahugana became furious at the uneven ride. He mocked the strong young man for being so clumsy and threatened him with punishment if he didn't learn to carry the weight properly. The procession stopped. The silent man lowered his end of the pole, turned to the king, and finally broke his years of silence to speak. This was the moment where worldly power stood face to face with spiritual clarity. The man who owned the land was confronted by the man who had mastered himself. Bharata explained the distinction between the body and the soul. In this diagram, the outer shell absorbs the weight of the palanquin, the hunger of the belly, and the passage of time. But the static core, the Atman, is not the one carrying the weight. It remains an unaffected observer. He showed the king that the labels of master and servant are just temporary roles played in a single lifetime. In the cycle of rebirth, a king might become a deer, and a laborer might be a sage. The shell changes, but the core remains identical. King Rahugana's ego vanished instantly. He stepped out of his ornate carriage and placed his head in the coarse dirt at Bharata's feet, recognizing that the man he had been mocking was the only one on that road who was truly free. This is why the land bears his name. Bharata's story serves as the foundational narrative of the human journey, a cycle of power, fall, memory, and eventual awakening. His life shows that liberation is found in a precise balance. We can live with compassion for all beings, but we must never lose sight of the eternal reality that exists beneath the surface of the temporary world.